Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and originally I wanted to sit down today and finally film my Words of Radiance read-along companion video. However, this week has been a lot, so we're not gonna do that, and we'll just upload that video after the discussion for Oathbringer, which will be on, or has already been probably, as you're seeing this video, on my channel, together with Steph from Coffee Over Apples and Scylla from Scylla's Pockets. So, yeah. We're not doing that today. However, what we are doing today is we're gonna talk about all the books that I read in July. And not gonna lie, my July reading feels very underwhelming. I know that I did have a couple of, you know, enjoyable books in there, but overall I felt very slumpy mostly in July. But also at the beginning of July I finally got my Steam Deck, so July has been mostly filled with me just getting through Baldur's Gate 3. And then the other thing I started embroidery and cross-stitching, so I didn't really have that much time for reading anymore. But I still read a few books. I don't remember how many books, so let me open my Storygraph stats for July. And we gotta wait until it loads. Here we are. So, I finished a total of 6 books. So that's pretty much my monthly average so far in a month. This year, that's what I wanted to say. A total of 2,617 pages, so that's a bit less, I think, than I usually read. The average time it took me to finish a book was a month. So, I guess, I don't know. I finished a bunch of books that I've been reading for longer, to be honest. Moods were adventurous, emotional, dark, reflective, hopeful, and challenging. I read 2 books that were slow-paced, 1 book that was fast-paced, and 3 books that were medium-paced. In terms of page number, 66%, so 4 of the books were between 300 and 500 pages, and then I had 1 book over 500 pages and 1 book under 300 pages, that's what I wanted to say. I only read fiction this month. Genres were fantasy, classics, short stories, romance, historical, and contemporary. The formats I read was, I had 1 book, although I think it might have been 2 books. No, actually, I think this should be right. Yeah, 1 book that was digital, 1 book that I finished was audio. Oh yeah, right, one of the books that is standing here I finished in June. Sorry. Because I was very confused. Right here I usually have the books that I read during the month and that I still have to film reviews for, so there's 5 books here when I only read 4 physically, but 1 book is just a book I finished in June that I haven't filmed a review for yet. Then I read 5 books in English, 1 book in German. My average rating was 4.38 stars, although this is pretty warped because the 5-star book that I had, of which I had 1, was a reread. And then I had 1 3.75 star book, 1 4-star book, and 1 4.75 star book. So that means I did not rate one of the books, but I do not know which one it was. Oh, I think I remember which one I didn't rate and why I didn't rate it. Then, in terms of my diversity reading, which obviously Storygraph doesn't give me, I think I actually maybe possibly had no books by queer authors and with queer rep. Yeah, I had none of them this month, which is very odd for me, not gonna lie. Then I had 3 books that were written by BIPOC authors, and then I don't remember about disability rep. There was 1 at least where a character became disabled during the book. Otherwise, I can't think of anything right now. Because I'm tired, not gonna lie. But with all of that said, let's get into it, and let's start, as always, with my reread, which it was Oathbringer. I finally finished Oathbringer. Actually today, as I'm filming this, in a few hours we're gonna have the live show. As you can see, I tabbed it a lot again. I am a little bit done with the read-along, the reread of the series. While I did tab a lot, I usually, because it's over here, I use these sticky tabs that are like kind of transparent that you can write on to make my annotations, and usually I would use one of these packets per book. This packet is still mostly full, so I hardly put any annotations in there, aside from every now and again if it was like really unbearable. I just added a what the fuck, to be honest. But yeah, so first read. This also doesn't count towards my average reading because I just kind of don't rate Sanderson books anymore. I don't know, I have this thing where if I used to love books, that's also why I don't have any ratings for Sarah J Maas books. If I used to love books, but then I change my opinions on the books down the line, it feels kind of weird to rate them. Because like, yeah, they used to be 5 stars, now they're 1 stars. To me, like, what rating do I put there? So I don't have Sanderson books rated. And then I have a second, by the way, my finger is very red because I used a lip tint. Anyway, I have a second reread that I finished in July, and that was Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. I read the audiobook that was read by or narrated by Andy Serkis, which, by the way, I can so highly recommend. It's so great. And I read this over the past 3 months or so because I'm part of a project at a museum right now, and so I had to spend a lot of time in different archives just scanning stuff, and I just went through the audiobook doing that, and honestly it's still a 5 star. What can I say? I love The Lord of the Rings. I think it's an incredibly written story. It is very meandering, but I do not get why a lot of people are like, there's so many, like, too many descriptions of like trees and landscape, because I personally don't think there's that much description of landscapes. It's just generally a very meandering story, but I liked it, I loved it, so I love The Lord of the Rings. Anyway, and then I have a book that I didn't rate because honestly I just didn't know what to rate it, and that book is In the United States of Africa by Abdurrahman Waberi. This was actually my Read Around the World book for June, however I didn't start it, or it didn't arrive until the end of June, so I didn't pick it up, and actually I haven't started my July book yet, although I do own it, so I'm gonna have to read 2 books for the challenge in August. But anyway, this is satire, and it is written kind of like an account of immigrants, and it's alternate history where Africa and also Asia basically now hold the space that Europe and the US, so the cultural West, holds in today's society. And within this story, it's now the poor immigrants from Europe, where there's like war-torn states and like they live in abject poverty, etc., coming to Africa and trying to immigrate to Africa. And it's satire, and there's parts of it that I really enjoyed because it does the thing perfectly that satire does, where it uses the same type of wording that often journalists, newspapers, people from the West use when they talk about African countries. And it just makes the absurdity of those phrasings very, very apparent. I would read you the first page, but it's in German, so I don't think I can really, you know, I can't translate it on the fly. Anyway, however, I do also think that for me personally, while I was reading this book, while those phrasings were used to make it obvious how silly it is to talk about other people like that, there were also some of those concepts that weren't questioned enough for me. Like, for example, Africa very much is now a developed continent in the way that Europe is now developed. But it didn't really feel, for example, that this book questioned what the views of development even mean. Like, there were, for example, mentions of like huts with mud floors, and that was a sign of non-development. But it didn't really feel like those things were questioned, what it even means. Like, does high technology automatically mean more developed? Those types of things. And so there were like positives and negatives, so I didn't really know what to rate this. However, I do still think that it's a really interesting read. The author, by the way, is from Djibouti. It was the only author that I found for Djibouti. But anyway, so I can recommend it. However, personally, I just didn't know what to rate it. It was that type of book. Then next I have my 3.75 star read, which was The Lady in Glass and Other Stories, which is a short story collection by Anne Bishop. This is the latest book that she came out with, and now I have once again read all of her books. This is on the one hand a reprinting of short stories that Anne Bishop has published before, that you can either find bound in some of her books or that were part of other short story collections or have gone out of print, etc. And then also a bunch of new short stories, and it's just a fun, nice mix. Some of the short stories were connected to some of her series, so there's, I think, 2 short stories for The Others World, there's 1 short story for the Ephemera series, and there's 3 short stories or something for The Black Jewels. No short stories for Turrell Lane. And then there's fairy tale retellings and just random other short stories. And some of them I didn't really care about that much, others I really enjoyed, so I thought 3.75 is like a good middle ground for this type of short story collection. Don't really have that much to say about it though. Actually, I wanted, after talking about in the United States of Africa, I wanted to pull my next read around the world, which would be for September. So let's see where I need to find a book from, and for this one we have Cameroon, which I don't know how easy or hard it will be to find a book from there, but let's see, and I guess you'll see which book I read at the end of September. Next I have my 4-star, which is Masquerade by Oo Sangoyomi, which is a historical fiction set in pre-colonized Western Africa during the Yoruba expansion period. Actually, I kind of was a little bit sad because a lot of times when I read historical fantasy, I really like to Google on the side what's happening, just so I can get a better feel contextually as well, and it felt like it wasn't really possible for this one. I didn't even find the exact time period on Google, to be honest, so yeah, because there is a specific thing, like the story starts with the Yoruba conquering what's it called, like this massive city that had this massive incredible library. That's not Alexandria because that's the only one. Timbuktu, that's the story starts with the conquering of Timbuktu by the Yoruba, and for some reason, I don't know, maybe I just didn't Google enough. I had a really hard time finding, usually I don't go in depth, I usually just Wikipedia the stuff, but anyway. And so that's kind of the historic time frame. I think it's like the 15th or 16th century, and it also is set up the inspiration for the start of the story is the Persephone myth. However, it is not historical fantasy. There is something of 1 or 2 instances of moments where it's okay, do gods actually appear in the story, or is this just the characters kind of having spiritual and near-death moments? It's not quite clear, but I wouldn't put it into the fantasy genre, and I think the author herself also said it's very much historical fiction. And so you start with our main character Ododo, who is a blacksmith. And blacksmiths are this group of people. They are women and they are kind of a little bit outside of society. They are seen as witches and they are usually women who otherwise wouldn't have a place within society. And so Ododo at the very beginning of the story meets the king of Yorubaland, the Alafin, and is promptly kidnapped by his men and is supposed to marry him to become his wife. And so it's kind of about her finding her place at the Yoruba court and trying to navigate new relationships and also politics and just like finding her place in this kind of very unfamiliar space. And actually there's a lot of like very negative reviews that I just don't understand. That for me, when I read through them, I'm just like, you did not finish the book. Like, you didn't write that you didn't finish the book, but also you very obviously didn't finish the book. And the reason for that is that a lot of these reviews talk about the book as if it was a romance. This book is not a romance. Please do not go into this book thinking it's a romance, because a lot of the criticism that I have seen of the book was people saying they couldn't get behind the romance. They couldn't get behind the story or the romance between Ododo and the Alafin because he kidnapped her and they're not dark romance girlies or whatever. And yes, there is a lot of complicated feelings that Ododo has for the Alafin, but first of all, Ododo's motivations from the very beginning are made very clear. She's like, I'm just happy I don't have to live in the drags of society anymore. Did this guy technically kidnap me? Sure, but also, I'm a princess now, basically, you know? There's that on the one side, but also the, like, complicated relationship between the Alafin and Ododo is portrayed in a lot of its complexity. But a lot of times it's just very subtle. But then sometimes it's also not very subtle. Let me see if I can actually just very quickly find that quote where it's like, and I'm not telling you this isn't a spoiler, it's just to show this is not a romance, and it very clearly isn't a romance. So there is this situation between Aremo, I forgot his name, the Alafin, and Ododo, which Ododo, it's written in first person perspective, thinks to herself, still, although his hurt had pained me, I did not think it was completely fair. It was easy for Aremo to love me. It cost him nothing. However, it seemed that I was expected to love him by giving myself to him. So, like... Anyway, it's not a romance. There were times where I wasn't exactly sure what I would give the book, to be honest, because there were instances where I was like, okay, this can end a few different ways, and if it ends in certain ways, then I'm probably gonna give the book a lower rating. However, this book ended in the most perfect way ever. Did it end a little bit too ideally? Yes, but it's a story. I don't always care about that. And I love the ending. I love that the author went there. Anyway, there are some things about the book that not everyone will like. It is written a lot of times, which retellings and like modern fairy tales can more often be, sometimes in more of a telling not showing way, because it's more a story being told. Like our main character tells us her story, and it's not as it's happening right now, but she tells it to us in retrospect. And so if you don't like that with certain retellings, I can see how you might not love the book. There's also Ododo sometimes being a bit more of a passive character, but not in a negative way, but some people just love going on and on about how they hate passive characters. So if you don't like passive characters, maybe also pass this book up. However, what I will say, even though it is not perfect and I have certain criticisms of the book, in the middle there for a bit, it lost me a little bit, for example. This book does a lot of things where I'm like, I am so excited and I hope to see more by this author in future, because this is also a debut. So yeah, I just hope this author will have the chance to publish more in this direction. And then the last book, which I will try not to ramble on about too long because I do intend to film a full review on this, is The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This one surprised me. This one follows 3 different characters. We have Nina, we have Hector, and we have, I think, Valerie was her name. Valerie? Valerie. And so Nina is a young, very spirited girl who belongs to high society and who has her introduction into high society. However, she's kind of not quite proper enough to be a proper high society lady. She has also powers of telekinesis, which is also not proper. However, after she meets the performer Hector, he agrees to teach her, and Nina slowly falls in love with him. Hector has his own motivations for getting closer to Nina, and that is that Nina is the cousin of the husband of his first love, Valerie. And he wants to get closer to Valerie again. And then Valerie is just there and is a very spiteful and angry person. This was the last book that I said I would read by Silvia Moreno Garcia, because I have read 4 books by her so far. I loved one, I hated another, and I didn't really care all that much about 2 of them. So I was like, okay, 3 out of 4, not a good track record. I still own this, I will still read this. Tell me why I gave this 4.75 stars. I love this book so much. Like, the relationship building was incredible. This is, I think, technically fantasy romance. However, it does not really feel like a romance book, because while the romance is the center of the story, it feels more so that there's a relationship, or you know, a dynamic at the center of the story that just so happens to be a romance. It doesn't feel like it being romantic is necessarily the main intention of the story, or like the main point of the story. So yeah, but I absolutely loved and adored it, and I will stop here before I start gushing, because I do want to film a full review on this. And so with that, there's one thing left to do, and that's to pick a series continuation thing, which I do think I need to update my jar. There might be some series in there, or not in there yet, that I should continue on. By the way, I did not continue on with Blackthorn and Grimm because I only just got the book. And for August, we're continuing on with the Dark Star trilogy by Marlon James, and I do have the next book right here, so we will read Moon Witch Spider King, which will be intense. This, like, I love the first book, but these are some very dense books with like 100+ page chapters. The chapters are so long in here. Anyway, so that is it for my wrap up. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. Tell me in the comments down below, did you read any of the books that I talked about? And if you did, what did you think of them? All the links to my social media, as well as to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, will be linked down below. And in July, by the way, if you're interested, August, if you're interested, we will read Goddess of the River by Vaishnavi Patel. And yeah, with all of that said, I hope I'll see you soon, and bye!